Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the show. So, the other day I was on TikTok and I came across a video that spoke about the pink pill. And it was a video from someone who said that they'd written a Substack article about what they were talking about, but they'd already piqued my interest. So, naturally, I went to the Substack link and it's by an account or it's by a newsletter called Raz's Revelations. And the article itself is called Men Aren't Wallets, Women Aren't Prizes. And it's quite a long read, but it's a really, really good one. I'd recommend reading it. I've reshared it or reposted it on my Substack. Um, but essentially, the author is taking a critical look at modern dating advice, particularly the rhetoric often referred to as the female red pill or the pink pill that's gained traction online. Um, the author is arguing that these popular ideologies, whilst framed as empowerment, they actually repackage sexism and encourage women to pursue provision and to be chosen rather than seeking purpose and independence. That was my reading of it. Now, obviously, disclaimer, I am a man, so I am going based off some of my thoughts about this article. This article just gave me some food for thought, and that's what I'm talking about. This is one of the examples where I haven't got expertise in this, but I'm just playing around with ideas in the public. There's this whole idea, just as a little tangent, there's this whole idea about the like the knowledge budget or something. I think it's what Chris Williamson came up with. And the idea is that imagine you have a budget and you can deposit money into your account by talking about things that you have expertise about, and then you can withdraw from your account by playing around with ideas in public. And the idea is that you should always try and keep a positive balance. And I think that I've got quite a lot of credit in my account right now. So I'm playing around with this idea in public, and I'm doing so completely respectfully. But I also understand my position in this conversation is very much speaking from the outside in a lot of ways. But my analysis, I've got a few notes about the article's main points. So there's a transactional trap. So the ideology that we see on social media a lot, the author critiques this ideology for fostering what she calls a duality of contempt, where women reduce men to their wallets and men reduce women to their bodies or to being trophies, their ability to be trophies. And this can create a hostile transactional dynamic. And the article points out whilst this dynamic masquerades as liberation, it actually encourages and compounds an endless loop of fear and demonization, which I agree with. Um, the article goes on and says that this pink pill philosophy is a mirror of male red pill ideology. Um, it mirrors the male red pill ideology through being nihilistic and having a transactional posture. And it just swaps the kind of rhetoric from the red pill ideology. So in this pink pill ideology, women are the prize and men are the bidders for this prize. One of the major arguments from the article is that it asserts that what's truly being auctioned is a woman's own independence and purpose. Um, and it links the women's appeal of these scripts to a psychological need for hyper control and a fear of effort in some cases, a fear of responsibility, and a fear of risk. And that effort, responsibility, and risk is what comes with true autonomy and freedom. And the author is arguing that some women would rather forego autonomy and freedom to avoid having to put in the effort, to avoid having to take on the responsibility and the risk. that comes with those things. The author, this is a really well-researched article as well. It's the whole thing is grounded in philosophy, referencing people like Plato, Aristotle, Karl Marx, Simone de Beauvoir, and Marcus Aurelius. I'll go into some of the key or relevant arguments of each of these writers. So Plato's Republic is used to distinguish between mere cessation of discomfort and genuine fulfillment, i.e., if you stop discomfort, if you stop feeling uncomfortable, we might think or we might feel something which is like a close cousin to fulfillment, but actually we've just removed discomfort. That's not true fulfillment. And Plato talks about this cessation of discomfort not being representative of genuine fulfillment of the soul. And he argues that transactional relationships confuse a neutral, cynical state with true happiness. Transactional relationships confuse a neutral, cynical state with true happiness, i.e., these transactional relationships, you may not feel good, you may not feel bad about them, they just are what they are. And you can be quite cynical about them. And we mistake that for what true happiness is. Plato also insists that trading independence for financial provision is enslaving the noblest part of oneself. Now, my thoughts about this is that I think we need to be careful in our analysis for confusing a few different things. I think we can confuse perceived protection of the self with preference, with like a kind of pathological analysis. And what I mean by that is that in our analysis, we might say, oh, like these people just want to protect themselves. So this, like if we talk about red pill, right? Men or boys might just want to protect themselves from being hurt or manipulated by women. Okay, that's an argument that could be made. And that's psychological, right? That's a psychological thing from the man. And then, but we might be mistaking that for preference. And preference is fine. You know, a man can also just have a preference for a certain person, just as a woman, in the context of this article, might just prefer to be with a richer guy. That could just be their preference. And then when we analyze it, we can like teeter towards pathology, I think is the right word, where we're saying, no, the only reason you think this is because of past trauma. But that might not be the case. We don't know that. Do you know what I mean? So I've got a few thoughts about this, which I'll talk about later on. But essentially, just as a little teaser, I think the whole point is that there is a certain amount of work required to have an opinion. And my wager, even reflecting on myself, is that too often we don't do the work required to have the opinions that we have. And I'll talk about that later on. So after Plato, we've got Aristotle. Aristotle wrote, I hope I'm pronouncing this right, Nicomachean Ethics, and it was used to explore human aims, virtue, and friendship. And Aristotle argued that money is merely instrumental and not the final good of a life or relationship. True love is an activity, a practice of mutual respect and care, not a product or transaction. Now, I understand that there are a lot of men being referenced here. So I am also going to refer to one of the best feminist writers and Black writers, Bell Hooks, R.I.P. Bell Hooks. And this is one of the only passages that I highlighted when I read all about love. And apologies, I am going to read the whole thing. Bell says, even though psychoanalysts from Fromm writing in the 50s to Peck in the present day critique the idea that we fall in love, we continue to invest in the fantasy of effortless union. We continue to believe we are swept away, caught up in the rapture, that we lack choice and will. In The Art of Loving, Fromm repeatedly talks about love as action, essentially an act of will. He writes, to love somebody is not just a strong feeling, it is a decision, it is a judgment, it is a promise. If love were only a feeling, there would be no basis for the promise to love each other forever. A feeling comes and it may go. Peck builds upon Fromm's definition when he describes love as the will to nurture one's own or another's spiritual growth, adding, the desire to love is not love itself. Love is as love does. Love is an act of will, namely both an intention and action. Will also implies choice. We do not have to love, we choose to love. Despite these brilliant insights and wise counsel they offer, most people remain reluctant to embrace the idea that it is more genuine, more real to think of choosing to love rather than falling in love. So this isn't entirely relevant, but it more backs up Aristotle's point of love is an action, love is a verb, and that can be seen as being opposed to this pink pill ideology. Karl Marx. Marx's The German Ideology is used to discuss how power imbalances and the ruling class's ideas shape thought. The article argues that online coaching scripts are not subversive, but are in fact ornate and intricate confirmations of the status quo, laundering misogyny by repackaging traditional subordination as empowerment. So the article that I'm talking about on Substack, it uses Karl Marx's ideologies and is saying that pink pill philosophy is just repackaging misogyny to reframe the subordination of women as empowering. And this is linked to Marx because it's kind of how the media works, right? Marx is very good at describing how ruling classes' ideas shape our thought. And it's important to just recognize that. If you've come up with this idea, if whoever has adopted red pill, pink pill, whatever pill you want to choose on your own, and that's genuinely what you think, and you've done the work required to have that opinion, then that's one thing. But I don't think a lot of people do, and I don't think a lot of people have, to be honest. And I think we've seen something, and it is marketed in a way which resonates with us, but it's the marketing that resonates with us, not necessarily the idea. Simone de Beauvoir wrote The Second Sex, and central to that book is the argument that transactional dating perfects otherness by defining women relative to male desire rather than as autonomous subjects. So de Beauvoir warns that trading freedom for the security of dependence is existentially ruinous and a degradation of existence, a degradation of existence. Finally, Marcus Aurelius, in his meditations, he stresses self-governance and the sovereignty over one's mind and choices, which is directly opposed to outsourcing security to a man's wallet in the case of the pink pill, right? And Marcus Aurelius argues that strength is found internally and peace should be contingent on reason and virtue and not on external factors. So we really need to look inward, and the further outward we look, arguably, the worse it is. So that's just a very long summary of the entire piece, of the entire article. And it is critiquing the idea that dependence is power, really. And that's what the pink pill ideology kind of says, in not the most obvious way, but that's pretty much what it's saying. There is certainly a veneer of empowerment. There's a psychological appeal to having rigid rules, because rules give us an immediate sense of control and clarity, especially when we're confused or lost, which happens a lot in the world of dating, right? We seek we seek external rules when we feel internal chaos. This is why, when things are spiraling out of control in our personal lives, we might choose to go on a diet, or we might choose to not drink any alcohol, we might choose not to not go out or anything. When we set rules, it gives us a feeling of control. And I think that this pink pill or red pill or whatever pill is an example of setting these rules, which, although they are psychologically appealing, they only provide a veneer of empowerment. My thesis, at the risk of going down the route of, you know, diagnosing a pathological diagnosis, to put it in some words, my thesis is trying to differentiate an intentional, self authored choice, whatever that choice may be, from a trauma driven compulsion, which is manipulated by media, whether it be social media or mass marketing or whatever it is. And the most recent derivative of that mass marketing, I think, is this pink pill ideology. So if we look at pink pill and red pill, one could argue that they share the same pathologic root, which could be unprocessed emotional pain. So, as I said earlier, the red pill example could be a young man turning a personal rejection from their past into a dogmatic set of rules about women to regain a feeling of control, when the real issue is his unaddressed rejection and pain. I think, just as a side note, I think we do need to get better at addressing and digesting pain and rejection, because it's going to happen, right? It's going to happen in any kind of domain, and we need to get better at processing that. It's not a problem with us. It's not a problem with the person necessarily. It's more a case of you just weren't right for each other. This can happen with a job. If you get rejected from a job, you don't need to make a set of rules saying, I'm never going to apply to that kind of company again. It just wasn't meant to be in that scenario. You need to get better, let it wash over you. We need to get better in most cases at digesting and dealing with rejection and pain, I think. So the pink pill equivalent to that is where we have rules about demanding provision, and the thesis is that can often be a defensive dogma designed to cover up a prior emotional or maybe financial trauma, rather than a conscious, self-authored choice, right? And an idea that I'm playing with literally just on the spot is one of the ways we can maybe go about considering whether we have a certain preference due to emotional trauma, financial trauma, or whatever kind of past trauma that we haven't dealt with, or whether it's something that whether it's a conscious self authored choice, is let's think about our ability to talk about why we have that preference. And this comes back to this thing that I said about the work required to have an opinion. I think this is an article in Farnham Street. I can't remember. But there is a lot of work that's required to have an opinion. I was joking with my uncle one time. He said that someone he knows is a flat earther, right? And whenever he tells anyone that he's a flat earther, he gets laughed out the room, laughed in his face. And his response, though I don't agree with flat earthers, his response was, well, here's the thing. I've done a lot of research into this. I'd wager I've done probably 100 times more research than you have into the shape of the earth. So what right do you have to just dismiss? I'm not hurting anyone. What right do you have to just dismiss me here? Do you know what I mean? So like here, even though I disagree with the whole flat earth theory, he clearly will have done the work to have that opinion. And you can't deny that. That maybe is a tangent which isn't too related, but the point is that I don't think enough of us are doing the work required to have an opinion. And when it comes to our own feelings and how we feel about things, I don't think we're doing the work to understand why we feel those things. I don't, and in doing so or in not doing so, we aren't really respecting our feelings, but we're expecting everyone else to respect them, right? If we don't do the work required to have that feeling and to understand why we have that feeling, then that is showing a lack of respect for that feeling. But at the same time, we do expect everyone else to respect them and to understand them, even if we don't understand them ourselves. So if you have a preference, that's absolutely fine. I've got preferences, it's fine. And if we can talk about those preferences, it's fine. And I'm not saying we need to do it for all of these different things, but this pink pill ideology, fundamentally, it's just piqued my interest. And I think it's trending, it's potentially a little bit clickbaity, but it's something that I think is worth talking about. So this whole podcast is called By Design, right? And I think having an intentional preference is choosing to be a certain way or choosing a preference by design. It's perfectly valid to have an intentional preference for a financially secure or an ambitious partner or a partner who has a certain job or whatever it might be. This is just a value in the design of your life, and your life is absolutely yours to design. However, there is a crucial difference. I think this becomes a negative when the pursuit of, in this case, the wallet is a compulsive symptom designed unconsciously or maybe consciously to shield a past wound. So, in this way, the external object, which is money or status, and which are both things that everyone is chasing, but that external object is used as an emotional shield against some kind of internal pain. And the philosophical cost to this is that this compulsion is not empowerment, it's a denial of liberty. You're trading authorship for armor. And that's the main crux of this article, right? So, I suppose one of the core lessons from this, or one of the core takeaways, for me anyway, from this, is about rejecting the external scripts that red pill or pink pill doctrines provide. And from this, I would challenge myself, but I'd also challenge you, dear listener, to question, are you acting from intentional choice, which is what you actually want, or from some kind of compulsive avoidance in what you fear? And, you know, this is like classic like therapy talk, and I'm not a therapist, but I would recommend that. I think everyone needs to go to therapy. I think everyone should. I think it's only a positive thing, which would absolutely highlight whether we are using things as an emotional shield. But I digress. And then from that initial challenge, I think that we should shift the focus back to ourselves and to be empowered to author our own story, have the emotional courage to author our own story. Live life truly by design. After doing that internal work to process whatever experiences have happened, then we will be more empowered to make choices from a place of genuine strength and genuine preference. And in that way, we can ensure that our relationships are joyous because we choose for them to be joyous rather than being victims to the shield that we heard would bring us this joy. Because, you've got very smart philosophers from all the way back from ancient Greece saying that that won't work. You won't get the joy that you're looking for through this kind of transactional relationship. So in short, I challenge you to design your own prize. Make sure that your prize is something that you've chosen and that you continue to choose by design. And in general, I think we should be very careful when we're playing with something like a relationship or with other people. I don't think either of those things are to be played with to any degree that could be potentially harmful to yourself or to others. And on that note, that is the end of this podcast. That's all I've got to say about this piece. I'd really recommend reading it. As I said, it's Raz's Revelations. Men aren't wallets, women aren't prizes. It's an amazing piece of writing, and I'd love to hear what you think about it. If you enjoyed this podcast episode, please like, subscribe, give it 5 stars on Spotify. I'm only on 5 stars at the minute, so let's keep it up. And please share this episode with someone who you think would enjoy it, someone who you think would get something from it. I'd really appreciate that as well. But thank you so much for listening. And as always, I will see you on the next one.